would not be, in a typical company, you would not be looking at design and development in isolation. You will be typically looking at the technical feasibility of it. If you remember the last class, DBF. So you'll be looking at the technical feasibility of whatever you're designing, whatever you're coming up, whatever new, I don't know, new flows, new screens, new processes that you're setting up. You would look at the technical feasibility of it before actually implementing it. And that is why they're kind of coupled, right? Usually in most of the literature that you'll find online, they talk about design and development separately because they are essentially taken care by different teams. So one is a UX team, the other is the development team. And that's the reason why they are typically in the literature that you'll find, they are separate. But in reality, it is not too separate. A designer would be working very closely with the developer and the product manager and vice versa. All the three are working together, and literally on every day, on a very frequent basis, the technical feasibility of whatever is being designed is going to be checked. And usually in the companies where there is a lot of finger pointing and blame game that happens between teams, in those companies, usually the problem is that technical team, the tech team and the design team and the product team, they don't talk to each other very much, or they don't involve each other in their decision making. Okay, there is no common shared vision or shared vocabulary that is established in the company. Thankfully, I've been I've been part of companies in which we were able to set up very good processes as well as teamwork or shared vision, so that the teams were involved. So development team was involved in the design process, design team was involved in the development process. So there was no blame game, there was no finger pointing or very minimal finger pointing, which enabled a much larger push forward. Okay. So with this, let's start. Today, there's a lot of stuff to cover. So pay attention, get some water if needed. So in the last, I'll just jump out and I'll share my screen, and I'll also switch off my video just so that conserve the bandwidth. Okay, so we have hit the quorum just in time. And where is the screen? Where is the screen? Where is the screen? Oh, yeah. Can you see my screen? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, awesome. Great. So if you remember, in the very first class, and I think I'll keep going back to this again and again. In the very first class, we spoke about product discovery and building a product discovery cycle, right? Now, this product discovery solution framework will ultimately give you a bunch of solutions, right? And against the solutions, you will then create a bunch of experiments, correct? If you remember, something of this sort will come out, right? Now, something of this is going to come out, right? So you did your product discovery. The outcome was, let's say, there were a bunch of solutions that you thought is meaningful, right? Now in this, for each of the solution, you would perhaps create 3 or 4, maybe 5 different experiments. For example, let's talk about Uber versus Lyft. So there is Uber and Lyft, two competing services in the ride-hailing space. Now, let's say there is, let's say that one of the solutions that is, so there's one opportunity that is for large groups. If there are groups of, let's say, 5, 10 people, for them, riding an Uber or hailing a Lyft is a painful experience, because one group might get an Uber while the second group is still waiting, and it becomes very problematic to manage. Now, in that case, that's an opportunity. How do we solve that opportunity? One experiment can be, how about creating a, let's say, creating a multi-car hailing service? Okay, that's one solution. Let me just write it down just to be sure. So the problem is, large groups can't hail Uber. Let's say we are solving it for Uber only, right? That's a problem. That's a opportunity that we have. Now for the solution part, let's say we are coming up with few ideas. Idea number one, oops, allow multiple cars to be booked in one go. Right. Number two, let's say provide large vans as a product. That could be another one. Option number three is, let's say, I don't know, I'm not able to come up with an option three, but let's say these are the two different ideas. Now, for each one of them, both of them are large enough in terms of technical work, operational work, that they can't be simply launched or implemented. So you would want to run different experiments. Experiment one, let's say experiment two. Now, these experiments are not just to, so these experiments are designed for multiple reasons. One, for example, price point. Two, what audience. Number three, location. Not all geographies require this, for example. Not all geographies get so many people in one go. So for example, if you're in Las Vegas, there's a good chance a large number of people are landing in Las Vegas frequently. So in that case, you would want to launch or maybe introduce this service in Las Vegas, in Vegas itself, or in, let's say, LA itself, because there's so many conferences that happen in LA and Vegas that the number of people who are landing up there is pretty large in a group, right? So you might in one experiment you might be testing the geographies. In one experiment you might be testing the audience. In one experiment you might be testing the pricing. So you'll create multiple experiments. Now, in each one of them, the problem is it's still very, the problem is we're all talking about very big ideas, right? We're talking about very large problems which are very removed from, let's say, how will this large experiment ultimately convert into a meaningful, tangible task in a developer's sprint? Correct? These are very high level things, and we need to break it down to the last bit, last atom, so that it can be picked by an operational guy or a sales guy or, let's say, a product guy or a tech guy, and implement it. Correct? So in today's journey, today's next 50 minutes, we are going to cover just this journey. Okay. So what I like to call it, big ideas to clear ideas. How do we go from here, big, to the clear ideas? Yeah. So now to run this experiment properly, the very first ingredient is a user persona. Without user persona, without a user, you can't really do anything. Now, you might have done ample research beforehand, or you already exist. For example, Uber already exists. So Uber already knows the kind of users who use Uber, correct? In this case, Uber has some educated guess about what kind of audience might like this. It's not completely, shooting in the dark. In certain other cases where you're building a product absolutely from scratch, so you don't exactly know who is your user, you're not done user discovery, so to say. In that case, you can make educated guess, but you have to start from somewhere. Okay, you can't shoot in the dark. And we will actually talk about that scenario also, where you can't do whatever the case be, but you have no idea who your user is or who might be a user. You think that it's a large problem for a large audience, but you don't know which audience is actually going to pay for it. We're going to cover that case also, don't worry. So I'm not going to go very deep into the persona, so to say, because there's a lot of online literature that you can find. A typical persona looks like this. This person is a fictional person, just to say. This David Miller is a fictional character, okay? Just like your Khaleesi and your house, this guy doesn't exist, okay? But he's an abstracted, not an average, abstracted persona that accurately represents a large audience that you might want to target. So for example, you can't say that all the college students living in California are my customers. Not exactly. That's too broad, right? You would want to go down to the last mile as to who exactly is this person. So for example, in Uber's case, if I just talk about this Uber's large group case, let's say all the college students in California who are traveling at least 20 miles to get to their college is my customer. Okay, that sounds a little better. Then now you can go further down as to who will be these people who would prefer to take an Uber in group rather than take a public transport or maybe drive down by themselves, because a lot of people in California already have their own cars or bikes or whatever. Correct. And so as you narrow it down, you'll ultimately land upon a very clear persona of somebody like, let's say, David Miller, or let's say somebody like Betty, for example, who has a clear bio, who has a clear wants and needs, has a clear technology inclination or whatever, the frustrations and so on. This is a very, very small, very tiny persona. Typically personas can be very, very large, but this illustrates the scenario very clearly. Why do we do this? We do this very clearly because uh, one of the biggest issues, as I said very early, one of the biggest issues and one of the biggest reasons for frustration in the companies, in the teams, in the designers, the developers, etc., is because we are talking about different problems altogether. There is no shared vision. There is no shared vocabulary. The success metrics of different teams are also siloed, right? So there is a fragmented understanding of business, fragmented understanding of the users, fragmented understanding of your own product. And then there are siloed metrics. Design team is attacking a different metric, product team is attacking a different metric, operations team attacking a different metric, leading to everybody fighting everybody else. Correct? And which is why this exercise is very critical to ensure that everybody's talking about David and not some faceless entity, right? And if you don't do this, the problem would be something like this. I'm sure you would have seen this diagram a lot of times. Blind man and elephant. So operations team is talking about, no, I know the problem. This is the problem, and so on and so forth. Sales team is talking about a different problem altogether because they're all not looking at David. So somebody's looking at David, somebody's looking at Betty, somebody's looking at, let's say, John, somebody's looking at somebody else, right? And everybody's fighting against each other. But if you have a single vocabulary, you're talking about then you're fighting about the same person, which is good. Yeah. So this is the persona. Now, how do you arrive at this persona? Okay. So right now, consider persona as a singular concept. I'll tell you how it weaves into the entire scope of things. Okay. So one of the easiest methods to do this is like something that I personally use quite often is simply the empathy map. Okay. Simply draw this quadrant, put the person in your mind. Okay. That, okay, I'm looking for somebody who just barely makes, like, who makes minimum wages, travels about 20 miles to go from point A to point B, attend a college, or maybe go to the work. Go to work. Now, this person, what this person thinks, or what does this person feel, does, or says, right? So what you're essentially looking at is attitudinal versus behavioral differences. Attitudinal is what is he thinking and saying, the upper half, what he's saying and what he's thinking. Okay. So typically what people say versus what they do, they're not same. Okay. What they say is typically connected with how they want to be perceived or how they want to be projected, right? So that is why the first half is, the upper half is all about what they say, what they think, that is attitudinal. While the second half is all about what they do versus what they feel, right? This is behavioral, what they actually do, who they are actually, right? So you can say the lower half is who they are, and says and thinks is who they want to be, right? So you can see in the empathy map, in the things, one of the card is, do they think I'm stupid? So it's all about how they want themselves to be perceived, right? So if you do this, typically you will be able to circle it down. You will be able to negotiate down to a simple persona. My strong recommendation: always have one representative photo of who this person is, who this persona is. Okay. Because once you have a photo, once you have a name, and you have all of this information, then when you're talking about your user stories and your details and stuff, then your tech team, your design team, your operations team, all of them can use the same persona. That, okay, we are building this for David. We believe that David is going to love this. Yeah. Then it becomes much easier conversation than saying, yeah, we think this user is going to like it. Like, and then, the fight ensues. So now with this behind us, let's talk about three very critical maps, so to say. Okay. One is experience map, two is user journey, and third is service blueprint. Okay. Um, so there is a decent amount of literature available online on user journey. A lot of people have covered that. Not so much on service blueprints and experience maps, and a lot of people don't do it for a rightful reason. So I'll explain when experience map is actually used or useful, okay, and what exactly it is. So experience map is not for a particular user, okay? It is not for a particular persona. Experience map is the entire experience that your product or your brand or the broad audience that you're looking at, what they go through. So for example, in this case, a typical obesity patient will go through this entire journey, right? We'll go through a pre-diagnosis, we'll go through a diagnosis, we'll go through a diet and exercise, and then finally prescription and treatment. This is the entire experience map. This experience map can be designed for a particular brand, for a particular product, or for a particular condition. So for example, pregnancy, right? So if pregnancy, what happens in the first phase, that is the first trimester, the second trimester, the third trimester, and after delivery, immediately after delivery, the woman has to recover from the entire postpartum, postnatal exercises and everything else, right? So these are the 3-4 journeys that the person has to go through. Now this experience map is agnostic typically of the brand of the product, etc. But you can choose to create only for your brand. Like in this example that I've given, this has been designed for Click Health. If I just zoom in quickly, so obesity patient, what you need to bother about here is the left sections, right? So there is a phase. These elements, the vertical elements, are important. Phase, the duration, the condition, the action, the context, the support, or you can say the action, the thoughts, and finally the opportunities. Now these things are important. These typically across all experience maps, you can use the same headings. Okay, the phase, duration, condition, action, context, human support, or simply support, and opportunities. Okay, and this way you can create a full journey from left to right. Okay, so for example, just to give you first phase, so pre-diagnosis, 6 months to 5 years. It can take 6 months to 5 years for people to realize that they're obese, right? So patient admits and accepts condition and is encouraged by spouse to address condition, for example. Patient is in denial of his condition and feels shame and embarrassment. Both of the things are possible. Either the person is in denial or admits and accepts, right? And then they will do diagnosis with the doctor, then diet and exercise will commence for 6 months to 1 year, and ultimately prescription, right? So this is a typical large scale experience map. If you notice, it's a very broad, it's a very generic map of what a typical patient would go through. We are not talking about a patient who is also suffering from diabetes. We're not talking about a patient who is, let's say, aspiring to be a beauty model, for example. We're not talking about a specific patient in a specific geography of a certain age. Correct? We're talking about a generic patient. This is what happens. And now you will start identifying those different opportunities that you can address. So in the pre-diagnosis phase, maybe you can do there's a media opportunity, right? You can engage the spouse as an entry point to encourage the patient to take action, right? And so on and so forth. Let's move to the next one. So now once you have this experience map nailed, then you will commence a user journey, which is a specific user, that is a specific persona's journey through your product, through your journey, through your product or through your brand. Okay. Somebody is making some noise. Piyush, can you mute, please? Thank you. Yeah. So once you have, oops, what happened? Yeah. So once you have this experience map nailed, then you can get into user journey. Now, you must have seen, or at least somebody would have told you about customer user journey or user journey in general, customer journey map, or etc. etc. You might have come across this term because it is one of the more common, more popular maps that people end up creating. The reason being, most of the times you would have a persona or a user in your site. You kind of know who you're talking about, right? Or the kind of audience that you're attacking. You kind of know that. But let's say in those cases where you do not have any idea, I'm building something which I believe has a very large scale use case. But I don't exactly know who's going to use it, and I don't exactly know which audience will become the power user or which segment is going to become a power user. I don't know. In that case, it makes more sense to actually create an experience map first. Okay, because that will give you a better insight into these different pain points that we have kind of highlighted, 3, 4, 5, 6. Who will actually feel the real pain for it and would actually want to invest money to get out of that situation or that pain point, right? So if you are clueless about who your audience is, and you believe you're building something which is very broad based and there's no specific audience segment, etc., in that case, start with an experience map and then go to user journey, and don't start with user journey directly, because user journey assumes that you have already understood the persona, their aspirations, their goals, and you have understood a lot of those things, right? And you'll be blindsided if you start directly from here. Anyway, let's move on. Let's assume that you already have done this exercise and you have some sense of who your user is. So, for example, the Uber example I was talking about, the multi-user example I was talking about, large group example I was talking about. So you can create a customer journey map. This journey map has this broad structure. You can obviously add and delete things from here, but typically I would say this is the minimum that you should be adding. You should add something to this, not delete, in my opinion. But anyway, so there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 components here. The first is the square, which is the persona. So if you have done your work, then you would put David's photo here, and perhaps put the name also, that, okay, we're talking about David persona here. So the customer journey map is always designed for one persona. It is 1:1 mapping. Okay. You don't make generic customer journey maps. Generic customer journey map, if I can call it, then that will be the experience map. Okay. So persona and CJM, there is a 1:1 mapping. Sorry. Yeah. So there's a 1:1 mapping between persona and CJM. Now, the first block is persona. This 2 is scenario, specific scenario. We'll cover scenario in a bit. What is scenario? What is use case? So what is a scenario? So in this case, in the Uber's large group example, the scenario is David is part of this 10 students delegation going to Google's office for an internship, and they have to travel every day for the next 2 months, and they're looking for a simple solution, simple, cheap, effective, affordable solution to commute daily. Okay. Now, what are the goals and expectations? You put all of that here so that you have a persona and the context very clear, right? Then comes a third point, which is the phases, the dark rectangles that you're talking about. These are phases. So in this experience map, for example, you saw the pre-diagnosis, diagnosis, diet, and exercise. So you divide the entire journey into phases. So in large group case, the first stage is, for example, meeting at a single point. Second phase is somebody takes the lead in booking the multi-car solution. Number 3 is waiting and alighting into the car. And lastly, reaching a destination and getting off the car and making the payment, right? So you can have different phases here. Number 3. Number 4 is the actions. Okay. So number 4 is actions. That is, what are you expecting this person to do? If you realize, if you've done this exercise of persona, what he does is kind of what you will be putting there. What are the actions that you are expecting this person to be doing, right? Number 5 is, what is he thinking, or thoughts, right? What are the thoughts? So this is again something that comes from this empathy map. So this thinking part, these questions will come here. Okay, number 5. What is this person thinking? Is he thinking, am I stupid? Oh, this is too painful. Oh, this is very expensive. Oh, this journey is now so delightful. I'm enjoying this journey with all my friends in one single van, for example. Number 6 is the emotional experience, which is what the person feels, right? Again, if you've done the empathy map properly, then it's very easy to put in. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. So typically the entire emotional experience is a roller coaster ride. Sometimes you will feel good, sometimes you will not feel so good, right? And lastly, there is opportunities, very clear opportunities that you would like to focus at each of these phases. What are the different opportunities that exist? And finally, the internal ownership for these different opportunities. Who is going to own this entire phase? Okay. And this helps in clearly identifying who is going to do what. So to begin with, at the very top is the who, number one. Number two is what, scenario and goals and expectations. So you define who, you define what, then you define the entire experience, and then finally you define the insights. So if you do this exercise properly, then you'll end up with a whole bunch of different kind of customer journey maps. I'll just show you some example. Again, these examples are from the internet. The ones I have, unfortunately, I can't share. I have NDAs and all. But these are some of the examples that are there out there. So this is one, for example, very simple customer journey map that you can create pretty quickly. There is the persona. There's a scenario. Jamie needs to switch her current mobile plan. She wants a plan that can save her money without having to sacrifice usage limits. What are the expectations? Clear online information, blah, blah, blah. Now, what are the different stages? The phases: define, that is review your current plan, compare different plans, negotiate with the price and etc. And finally, select, that is define who I'm going to work with, correct? And now you can see this is what the person is thinking. I wonder if I can pay less. That offer seems like a better deal. Oh, why is this so difficult? Blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, well, I guess that was all worth it. So this is what the person is thinking. And the emotional ride is also being laid out in this single Bezier line that you can see, the curved line that you can see. And finally, there's an opportunity and there's an internal ownership. Now you can see in this very, very simple customer journey map, you can see the opportunity is not defined on the individual phase level, rather as a whole, it has been identified. But I'll just give you a few more examples where in this, for example, there is no opportunity defined. There is no internal ownership, just a very quick idea of there's a persona called Adam Artist who has this task, who has this motivation, this context. And this is what the entire experience is all about. This is what the person is thinking, and this is what he's doing, and this is what he's feeling, right? And then if you're really involved, you can go ballistic on this, and you can create something like this, where there is a persona right here. This is social gamer is the archetype. I'm not covering archetype today. That's too much to cover. Then there are phases, then there is different phases, and then there are different activities within them. There are different, fields, things, etc. All of that is given right in the middle. Similarly, you can see here as well. This is another example. What are the goals? The persona here, Viviana, Sebastian, the ecosystems that this impacts. There's app, there's intelligence, there's in-store, and then there are phases, and then there are these different moments, etc., etc. What are the opportunities and what can you do in each one of them, right? So you can go as detailed as you want, or as light as you want. Depends on your, how fast you want things to be. But this is what you will do typically at a user journey map. So essentially, empathy map is where things kind of start. At least in my experience, it's the easiest entry point, effectively. Then you will create an experience map. You will create a user journey map, which is designed for a specific persona within your set of personas. And then you might end up creating a service blueprint. What is a service blueprint? So service blueprint is a specific business process. So CJM is all about the user, right? All about the customer. But now if the customer is expecting to do something, if the customer is doing something, the business has to respond with something else. Something has to happen internally, inside the business, to provide that service. So for example, in Uber's large group example, now David tapped on a button on Uber, and he's expecting the large van. Let's say we are going with a van solution. The large van is, he's expecting the large van to arrive in a short time. Now, what needs to happen internally inside of Uber so that the van can be dispatched and can reach David in 5 minutes? Where do you put that? So that is explained and established in service blueprints. So service blueprints are essentially grandchildren of experience map. So experience map is the very top. Then comes the CJM, And then you will create a service blueprint for a specific action that the person is doing or the business is expected to perform, right? Again, there's a lot of literature, okay, not a lot, but a decent amount of literature available online on service blueprints. So for example, this is a service blueprint. You will mention there's evidence, there's customer action, and then you will have a line of interaction, line of visibility, and then line of internal interaction. So if the user is visiting, spending time on the website, then what is the customer action? Visits website. What is the on-stage action? The technology is simply welcomes to website. That's it, nothing else, right? The backstage action is something has to write welcome message somewhere, correct? And then there is a internal interaction, which is online chat system, which is writing a welcome message. So if you break this down from top to bottom, essentially you get a full landscape of how the internal features that you are essentially building. Now you can imagine this can convert into a story on somebody's somebody's Jira, somebody's ticket, somebody's some developer's task list, right? So starting from a very high level problem, you have brought it down to a very specific story, very specific task that can go into somebody's sprint this week, right? Sorry, I zoomed out too much. Make sense? So I'll just take a pause and I'll just talk about once again, just to summarize all of this. So design effectively, this entire exercise is designed for bringing down all the intangible research that you have done overall into very specific stories, features, tasks that can be included in some operation guy, some sales guy, or some technology team's weekly sprint. How do you break this very high level thing into the specific task that somebody has to pick up this week? And this is the journey that you can take. You can start from the empathy mapping, maybe create an experience map if needed, or you can directly jump to CJMs, design a CJM, a small one if needed, or a very large extensive one if you have a very large use case, followed by a service blueprint if needed. And that is when you would have pretty much defined every nook and cranny of the problem at hand. How will David book the van? How will David get the van? You would have defined all of it. Now, this should lead to something called a PRD. Okay, after you've done all of this different work across different documents, across sticky notes and whatnot, after you've done all of this, this needs to convert into a meaningful document that can be used by the development team, by the operations team, by everybody else to operationalize or to execute the plan of action, correct? And for that, you would typically create a requirements document. Okay. Now, there is a small school emerging which says that there should not be any documentation. There should not be any requirements documentation. I don't know why they say that. I mean, their opinion is that it kind of, you're bringing back the waterfall mechanism and etc. etc. I believe that kind of purism is not practical. You need some documentation because you would want people to refer to some document as a source of truth, that this is what we are implementing and this is what is going to happen. Okay. So keeping that in mind, so this is something that I had designed a long back, about 3-4 years back. I had published this, and this got adopted in a lot of companies as well as in a lot of schools which teach product management, which teach software engineering and so on. I have covered this in detail in my article, so I'm not going to go into deeper of this. Broadly speaking, a product requirement document should cover 3 aspects. Okay. One, it should define the what and why to build. Okay, why are we building it? Who are we building it for? The timeline, etc. It should cover all of that. Number 2, it should cover the route of building it. That is how to build it. So what is the expectation, the quality, the user artifacts? User artifacts would include, for example, the persona, the experience map, the CJMs, the empathy maps, the designs, everything. It will include all of that. There is state machine, there is non-functional requirement. There's plenty of other stuff which I can't cover today. But essentially, this is all that you need to cover and how to build. And finally, you want to capture data. Okay. You want to capture data and you want to check whether whatever you planned, did it work? So you want to define outcome expectation, consumption expectation, utilization expectation, etc., etc. So you don't have to write and cover every single topic, every single point here. You don't have to cover reason, objective, all of that. As long as you're covering these three broad topics, which is what and why to build, how to build it, and did it work. If you're covering these three aspects, you are good. If you're not covering these three aspects, the developers and designers and everybody else, they are going to have a lot of doubts and they're going to come back again and again to you. Okay, so you want a good source of truth that people can refer to, and you would want this to be a document that can stand the test of time. Okay. So this is PRD. I can't go in very deep of it today. So now what you've done is you have gone through the persona exercise. You have gone through this entire journey. Sorry, I missed out on one single concept, one simple little concept. Let me just use this space to cover that. So there's something called use case, and there is something called scenarios. Yeah. So just to quickly explain, a use case is a collection of scenarios. Okay, so you want to go from point one to point A to point B. Let's say you want to go from, I don't know, San Jose to San Francisco, let's say. Now, this is a use case that there's this person who wants to go from San Jose to San Francisco. The scenario is the cabs are not running. So now there is one scenario that you can take your own car. You might take public transport. Now the public transport is shut down from, let's say, one line, let's say Redwood to San Francisco, the line is not working. The BART is not operational, for example. In that case, another scenario emerges, right? So you would create different scenarios, but all of them a collection of them would form a use case. Okay. This is an important thing just to keep in mind, because a lot of people use use cases and scenarios interchangeably, which is not good. At least if you're trying to be a product manager, don't do that. Kind of shows lack of understanding. Cool. So now that we have all of this behind us, by the time we reach to PRD, we have essentially defined the product in its entirety. Okay. Unfortunately, the way when you're teaching, I can't really jump too many times because I have to go through a certain linear flow. In reality, there's a lot of jump between these different stages. If you're designing CJMs and you're designing these personas and stuff, you will not be doing it in isolation. You'll be working with your designers and developers, right? And a lot of times, actually, in your company, UX team might be taking care of doing all of this, and you'll be playing a supporting role. Okay. Having said that, knowing this is very critical for you, because then you will be able to converse with your designers really well if your designers are responsible for doing all of this work. Okay. By the time you reach here, PRD gets created after you have also spoken to your development team and you have understood the feasibility, viability of it. Okay. So which is where let me explain few other important concepts. I will not go deep into information architecture because I want to cover the technical concepts slightly more. But information architecture essentially is all about how should something like this, how should your product behave overall? Okay. So there's going to be boot up screen. So there's going to be a logo, there's going to be software name, something. The user is going to log in. Within the login, there can be different use cases and scenarios. Then after logging in, either there's a new patient, there might be a patient hub, there might be a medical history, there might be a take photo, there might be summary. So this is the broad information architecture that you want your designers and your developers to keep in mind, that this is what we're building. Now developers are going to pick this up and going to create their own architecture, right? But you want something overarching. You want something overarching which everybody can refer to, which is what you are going to develop. Information architectures take different shapes and sizes, different designs, and so on. This is another one, for example, right? So there's a holiday. So there's a holiday which goes into calendar. Calendar goes into company. Different roles have different access to the company, and then there's a client and there's a project. And this is how you can manage a timesheet across the company. There's a cost center and so on and so forth, right? So this is what you would create as the information architecture, an overarching information architecture, so that all the different teams can easily understand how this entire system is going to work. Correct? So this is another artifact that you might end up preparing. Okay. If you realize, in the first 3 classes, we just covered the very intangibles. And from here on out, we are covering the very tangibles, the exact artifacts that you have to actually produce. Cool. Now, let's talk about what is the role of, so this is where I will pause in terms of product design, or where does your responsibility end?
Yeah, Talvinder.
Yes.
One thing that you want to close, I think there is one comment in here saying, is information architecture a wireframe? I think maybe you want to just close that and say how they are different.
No. So information architecture is not a wireframe. Wireframe is a accurate, or not accurate, but it's a representation of how a particular screen is going to look like. Okay. So a particular screen, for example, let me just jump in. For example, this one. So take photo. Now this take photo, this is the broad specs that have been put together, that it should display patient ID, it should display user ID, it should have live camera input, it should have these buttons. So now this is not how it's going to look, right? It is just mentioning these are the different elements that should be available on whatever screen the person is going to take photo. Now the wireframe is the one where you will actually place these elements and give a sense of how it is going to look. Okay. Information architecture is a higher level over architecture. Think of this as a as a map of a location of a city, maybe how the city is laid out and how the city you can navigate through the city. But once you enter a particular sector, particular market, particular mall, then that mall has to be laid out, has to be designed in a certain different way. I hope that answers.
Awesome. I think you made it very clear.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah. So team, one thing I want to tell you, there's tons of information available on information architecture. Whatever Talvinder is walking through is a very good insight into what you want to go dig about. Make a note of all the jargons and please do your research, right? So it is just not a wireframe. That's the one takeaway that I want to take out. Thanks, Talvinder.
Yeah. So now here, essentially, you have defined everything. You are done with the one large phase of, so in the first 3 classes, essentially you went through the entire vague, defining the vague problem and defining something meaningful as to what is a good opportunity to attack. Now, once you have defined that, the first part is done. The second part is converting that intangible into tangibles. And that is where you're creating all of these different artifacts. Okay. This is the second phase, which you completely own. Okay. Now this part is done. Now the time comes where you have to pass the baton to your development team. And you are now more of a spectator, more of an person who is safeguarding the voice of the customer, safeguarding the customer's expectations and customers' wants and needs and feels, etc. Okay. So which is where a lot of people have a lot of questions around how much technology does a PM need to know, right? How much technology does a PM need to know? How savvy do you need to be, etc., etc. So I'm going to cover those aspects. But before we do that, let's first of all understand the role after you have defined all of the above things. So after artifacts have been created, pass the baton to developers. So essentially now you are on the back seat. Now the developers have taken up the front seat and now they are driving the journey. Okay, you are still on the side seat and you are trying to navigate them, tell them that okay, you should take a right turn from here, you should take a left turn from here. You broadly give them a guidance, but exactly when to press the brake and when to accelerate is something that the developer is deciding. Okay, and you have to respect this part. You have to really respect that part, otherwise accidents will happen, right? You are not driving, developer is driving, you are guiding, right? In the previous phase, till the design part, till this part where you are defining PRDs and everything, you are driving and the developer is guiding. Okay, so have that separation of concern, separation of concern very clear in your head. Otherwise, you will step on developers' toes, and nobody likes that. Okay. So when you pass the bedroom to the developers, you will essentially pass all the artifacts. But here is the catch, that you do not want to pass everything, because that will become very overwhelming for the developer. So typically, the developers like to get a PRD, clear final designs, CJMs, or service blueprints. You can call them whatever you want to call them. You can mix and match them. So I've seen companies I've seen very smart people mixing service blueprint with CJMs and creating very beautiful diagrams. If you're really that structured, please go ahead and do that. But I find it very tough, so I don't do it, and I find it very tough to understand as well. So I usually break it down. So there's a master document I create, which is a PRD. And within that PRD, then I'll create all the designs. I'll add all the design links. I'll add all the CGMs. I'll add all the service blueprints. I'll add all the links in single document. Okay, you do not want too many documents floating around. So there has to be a single master document. Okay, this is my absolute note. It's an absolute deal breaker for me. If more documents float around, I I get pretty annoyed. Anyway, moving forward. Once you have done this, once you have passed it on, you will typically have a kickoff meeting. So things start with a kickoff meeting. Okay. If you have done your job really well, this problem is not new for the developer. You have already spoken to developer N times about, let's say there's David in Vegas who wants to travel with his group. Okay. So they already are aware of the problem at hand. Okay. You start from there. But once you have identified and understood every little cranny of the problem, and you have understood how, or you have defined how the problem should be solved technically, what screens will be created, what app will be made, what changes will be made, then you are doing a kickoff meeting to essentially formally say that, okay, now we can start. Okay, now we are good to go. You can please include this in a suitable sprint in this week or the next week, or maybe in the next month, depending on how your priority is lined up. Okay, so you'll have a kickoff meeting, number one. Next, after this, you will have Scrum ceremonies whenever the sprint kicks off. Okay, and before the sprint commences, before you actually get involved, you will also ensure that you are proactively unblocking developers. What does this mean? It means that, see, in real world scenarios, you will never have enough time to have clear designs, to have clear analytics instrumentation, to have clear all the diagrams. You will have some part of it clear, some of the part not clear. Or things will evolve. When you do kickoff meeting, you realize the developer says that, okay, this is not possible because we have deprecated something, right? Or notifications can't go right now because of ABC. Right? So something goes off, and you might have to iterate a little bit. Whatever the case be, there will be you'll have to proactively unblock the developer so that the user stories and the tasks that you have put together in the Jira, the developer is not blocked. That's an absolute sin. Okay. That's an absolute sin as a product manager, that your developer is waiting for clarification after commencing on the sprint. You can't do that. Okay, that's a cardinal sin. You should never allow that to happen. Okay, and if you're letting that happen, then make sure that is the last time you're letting that happen. You should never allow that to happen. Okay, I can't emphasize that much. So your task after you have done the kickoff is largely to be a guide, ensuring that the person is awake, the developer is awake. Like, imagine that analogy that I'm giving you, that you are sitting on the side seat and the developer is driving the Jeep. And now your job is largely to ensure that you're playing really good music so that the developer is enjoying it. There's a good rhythm, there's a good groove to the entire flow on one hand. Number two, you are ensuring that the driver is continuously awake, right? Awake and active. Number three, you are proactively telling him or her that there's a speed breaker ahead. There's a police checking ahead. There is a pretty awesome food restaurant ahead. Let's pause there and have something. Let's take a bio break in some time. So your job essentially is to proactively unblock the driver or developer in our case. Okay. Once the sprint commences, then your job is essentially to ensure that you are attending the stand-ups. You're attending the stand-ups. You are ensuring that any hurdles, any issues are handled proactively and included as early as possible. In certain companies, in large companies, you will typically have a Scrum Master, okay, to take care of the Scrum ceremonies, and you might have a separate product owner who might help you in doing this unblocking exercise. Okay, but yeah, in most technology startups, so to say, there won't be a product owner, there won't be a Scrum Master. There will be a product manager whose responsibility is to execute everything end to end. Okay, and post this, you will also take care of. So once the Scrum ceremonies are over, let's say 2 sprints, 3 sprints down the line, you would have a release ready feature, right? You would have a release ready product. And that is something that a product manager again takes over and takes to the marketing team and figures out how to market it. Okay. So this is what a typical product manager does. This is what the journey looks like. Okay. So as a product manager, your task would be to ensure that releases are happening readily. One. Number two, you would protect the sprint like your life depended on it. You do not want sprint to be disrupted for any reason. Okay. Number three, you would have made a large release plan that release 1 will go in 1 month once these many features are ready. Release 2 is going to happen in 6 weeks when these many more features are ready, and so on. Okay. So this is what a typical product manager does. But now, to do this job really well, what technology fund days do you really need? Let's talk about that quickly. So there are too many things to cover in technology fund days, but let me cover some of them. Again, there's too much of information available online, so there's no need to there's not much to bother about. But fundamentally, you need to get comfortable with data. Okay, you need to get comfortable with data in the sense that you should be okay working with SQL or Excel or both. Okay, now SQL requirement is not too much. You can use Tableau, you can use anything else. It's perfectly okay as long as you are comfortable working with data. Okay, so practice a little bit. Learning SQL is a 2-hour job. Learning Excel, especially pivot tables and macros, is like a 2-hour job. So just pick that up. That will help you a lot. Okay. Number two, you would want. There's a lot of noise coming. Can somebody's talking or there's some noise? Thank you. Yeah. Next is you need to understand, and this is where things become a little tricky. And I've seen some product managers get very worried for no reason. You need to understand technical stack or tech stack. Okay. Let me give you an analogy which I repeat too often. The analogy is very simple. If you're a cycle shop, okay, and you have no idea how cycles are made or cycles are repaired, do you think you'll be able to command any respect amongst your people or influence, or you'll be able to do the right things, suggest the right things to your employees or your people? You would never be able to, right? So when you're working with developers, you want to ensure that you are able to talk to them in their language, in their jargons, correct? And for that reason, you would need to understand tech stack. Okay, you would need to understand how tech stacks work. There are a few very popular tech stacks. LAMP is still alive and kicking for those who hate it. LAMP is still there. LAMP is used all over the place. LAMP stands for, I'll write that down. There is MEANSTACK, and then there is JAMSTACK. I'll explain all of this quickly. So LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Okay. I don't know how much, but I think 50, 60, or maybe 70% of all the internet that is there has been built on LAMP stack, some form or the other of LAMP stack. Okay. For example, WordPress, which powers pretty much 35% of the internet, is on LAMP stack, right? Then there is MEANSTACK. MEANSTACK is the modern stack. MEANSTACK stands for Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. But now Angular has been replaced with something else like React. A lot of people are using React. And because people have moved to React, so now Express has moved to Redux. So now I don't know what is the latest cool jargon to have. But broadly, the idea is that MEANSTACK is about relational databases and PHP, while MEANSTACK is largely about JavaScript. Okay, using JavaScript frameworks like Node and React, etc., and non-relational databases. And Jamstack is largely JavaScript, APIs, and Mongo, if I'm not wrong. Right? Sorry, Mongo, no. Sorry. It's mobile. Oops. Yeah. So it's JavaScript APIs and mobile. Why? Because there are so many JavaScript frameworks that exist. Literally, a new one comes up every other day. Right? So what is happening is you use JavaScript frameworks in the client side in the backend and connect to your mobile users' mobile phone, mobile apps with APIs, and that's pretty much creates the entire framework, at least to begin with. Okay. Why is this important? This is important because you need to understand. You should be able to talk to developers in their own language. You'll be able to have a slightly better influence, slightly more respect, and you'll be able to better negotiate the tech debt questions. Okay. So this is something that will come across a lot of times, which is what happened here? Why is it like this? Okay, yeah. So developers will talk about tech debts quite a lot. So what is tech debt? Essentially, they did a hacky way, not the most appropriate way of doing something, or let's say building something. Let's say they implemented an authentication system, which worked fine when the number of users was like 100. But now the number of users have increased to, let's say, 100,000. And that authentication method is no more as secure, as safe as it was. And so there's a tech debt in the system now, right? And on the other hand, you are talking about user-facing features, because users don't care about what kind of system you're running and how crappy your internal product is, as long as the user is getting value. As a product manager, you have to, so developers will push for tech debts, you will have to defend user-facing features. And if you do not know the implication of this tech debts, you will not be able to have a good conversation, or you will not be able to prioritize properly. Okay. So how do you help here? How do you figure this out? You figure this out by doing these 2-3 things. Okay. And it's not that difficult. Okay. Just sit down with the developer and they will typically be very nice people who will explain to you properly. Right. So you need to, first of all, get a sense of rough engineering estimates. Number one, you need to understand basic end-to-end software dev, what is happening internally. You would want to understand trade-offs of different programming languages and stacks. Okay, I'll just explain this quickly. So to explain, to be able to answer this rough engineering estimates, how do you do this? If you remember, I mentioned CPR ratio in the last session, right? Which is critical parts ratio. So in general, you would want to minimize the number of external packages that are being used in general. Okay. It's not practical all the time, but you would want to reduce it as much as possible. And that is why for very high performing products, everything is custom built. Nobody uses a third party package, third party tool. For example, nobody will use an Airbnb, for example, would not use an external calendaring system or an external checkout flow. They will design their own, because as things increase, as things become more critical, depending on any third party package will introduce issues, will introduce problems that will be very difficult to tackle, right? So you can imagine the same cycle, the bicycle example I was talking about. So as your bicycle business grows, earlier you were assembling the parts, that's it. You're buying parts from all the different places and you're assembling the parts and you're giving the people a certain kind of cycle. Over time, your cycles grew in demand. And now you're facing issues because the parts have to be custom made in some way. The parts have to have, let's say the gear has to have a different kind of gear ratio because of the kind of terrain that you're addressing. Now, if you rely on the external packages, there's a good chance the external package is not external vendor, external gear manufacturer might not be able to address your problem because it is too small, too big, too difficult, etc. So you will end up creating something of your own, right? So that is where the CPR ratio starts becoming very important for you to keep in mind, right? Next is basic end-to-end software dev. What does it include? So basic end-to-end software dev essentially includes few things. Number one is, for example, what are the different environments that are existing in the company right now? Okay. So I wrote it down, but I think I wrote it outside of the view. So I'll just paste it here. Yeah. So you would want to understand the different environments that exist right now in the company, in the app. So the production, the UAT, the client, the staging, the API servers. You would want all the different. You would want to know all the different environments and how do they differ and what is happening in each one of them. Okay. Whether this is going to help you do better things, maybe, maybe not. But having all of this idea will ensure that you can connect with whatever developers are talking. So when they're saying, okay, the staging server is down or the staging server is lagging, what does that mean? It basically means that the production code and the staging code are not there's a gap between them. So staging server is on, let's say, release version 3, while the production is on version 5, which is a problem, right? Then comes, how do developers code, review, and launch? How are they doing that? So are they using Bitbucket? Are they using Bitbucket for versioning, for example? Or they're using GitHub or GitLab, etc. What do they do? At what point they say that a certain feature is ready? What is when do they say, when do developers say that the feature is ready? Right? So for example, they would be testing it at staging. They would, sorry, not testing at staging, but they would have developed it on staging. It is working fine on staging. Then they push it to UAT. On UAT, somebody's testing it. And that's when they say that, okay, the feature is ready. Is that the case or something else is the case? And number 3, when do they say a release is ready? Okay. It's not enough to just say that, okay, I've built out, you said in this release, there are going to be 5 features. I made all the 5 features, now release it. Correct? The developers would claim the release is ready once a certain amount of code has been pushed to a certain stage, right? So that is when the release is ready is claimed. But you would want to know how the developers see it, or the engineering managers or whatever the technical team is doing. You would want to understand that. And finally, you would also want to understand what are the different things that are happening on the server side versus client side. Why do you need to know this? Because things that are server side don't need design changes. They don't need, client side changes. They don't need changes in the screen, in the design, in the buttons, and etc. You don't have to create new anything. Correct? So typically server side changes are a little faster, not necessarily, but typically faster than a client side change, right? And in that scenario, you would want to know the server side changes that you can implement versus the client side changes that can be implemented, right? So if you're using, let's say, a framework like, let's say, Meteor. I'm not sure how many of you are very technical, but let's say you are using a JavaScript framework called Meteor, for example. Right now, Meteor is a framework, JavaScript framework, which has both the client and the server side. So when you make certain changes, you have to typically also work on both the sides. You have to get both the things sorted. You have to get the client side changes also done and server side changes also done all the time. So which creates a decent amount of work every single time a change has to be made. Correct? As compared to that, let's say if you're using React, then React is just a front end. React is a front end framework, right? So now when you're making changes, you can just do a change in front end. So I will not get into reels, but effectively you would want to know. Okay, you don't need to understand programming. You don't need to know how to code. You don't need to know any of those things. That knowledge is good to have, but it's not necessary. But yes, if you are in a very technical company, let's say you're in AWS or in, let's say, some payments company, and you're facing you're directly working on payment products directly, then you typically need to be very technical. And some programming experience or some development experience in the past is going to be very, very helpful. If you don't know it, then it's a problem. When you are discussing with the developers on the different environments and the coding processes and the tech stack that has been used, try to ask, why did we pick this programming language? Why are we using PHP? Why are we using Python? Why are we using Node? Why are we using anything? Right? Try to ask them. So sometimes the reason might be that this language provides the best features for what we are building, right? So for example, WhatsApp is built on Erlang. Erlang is a language, E-R-L-A-N-G. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so WhatsApp is built on Erlang, for example. Why was this picked? Because Erlang was designed for telecommunications. And that's why it was able to do parallel processing, parallel streaming, etc., in a much better way than, let's say, C and the Pythons and of the world, right? And Erlang, till WhatsApp picked it, was kind of a very nerdy language, and nobody used to use it for web development or any kind of app development. But WhatsApp did it, correct? So you would want to know why you are doing what you're doing. This will help you in getting a better sense of what is happening behind the scenes, and you'll be able to better understand the tech debts at the top, which will help you in defining your roadmaps and your your features and your sprints in a much better way, because you'll be able to negotiate in a much better way. Okay. In general, when it comes to technology, it's a closing remark. No question is stupid. No question is too naive to have. Always and always ask questions, irrespective of whatever the case be. It's better to be better to understand and speak than to be misunderstood or to say something really, really wrong or to build something completely wrong. Okay. So no question is stupid. Developers are very, very good people who like to teach because they have been involved in learning, teaching, learning by themselves for a large period of time. And that is why if somebody asks them questions like these, I've not seen a single developer who would not want to explain why he's doing what he's doing. The problem is nobody asks. Everybody just tells them that, okay, make this for me and just ship it. Why is it taking this long? And nobody wants to understand why is this taking so long, right? So spend that time and you'll be good. As regard to the last point, which is trade-offs of different programming languages and stacks, you can easily find this online. What is LAMP versus Mean versus Jam? Try to spend some time in understanding MySQL versus Mongo, for example, the differences, etc. Truth be told, I can spend an year talking about this. Okay, it is that deep. But for your scope of work, this is good enough. Okay, in single sentence, spend 1 week with your developer, sit next to him, ask questions as much as possible, take him for beer, take him for burgers, and get all of these questions in 1 week sorted, and you're good. Okay, so this is where I pause for today. I can take few questions, and I hope this was useful. If I've not covered something, do let me know. I'll try to.
Hey, Talvinder.
Yes.
Ravi here. Would you mind touching a bit on the elk stack and the various deployment procedures, particularly in B2B high performance issues like Dockers and Kubernetes and stuff like that?
I think let's take that to Slack. That's a little more specific example to give. So right now, I'd rather like to take a little more generic example.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Abhishek, my name is Talvinder, not Tejinder. Key difference between a PM and a product owner. So a PM largely takes care of the all the way planning what to be built, who to be built for, and broadly how to build it and how to measure whether it's going to be successful. Once you've defined all of this, then the product owner is responsible for delivering the product in a way, right? For owning the entire delivery and helping the product manager in delivering the product. Okay, because product manager will still be safeguarding the users' voice and ensuring that the user's voice is heard and the customer is right there and speaking and listening to, etc., etc. Okay. Any other questions? Suman, any question that you think I should be picking up?
Hey, one. If you're okay, if you take 1 minute of the show and just stay one screen that I'm passionate about and I want the team to take away. One.
So you want to share the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, 1 second. I'll just stop my share. One second. I think I have to allow you to, yeah. So now you should be able to share. Check. Yes. Suman, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was talking on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hey, one takeaway that I want to give to the team is, you might have heard T skill always, right? But I want to make sure that you take this home as a PM, as a product manager. You need to have I skill. What is I skill is, as Talvinder talked about in the first 2-3 sessions, you have to have a very good view of where you want to have vision, where is that you want to take the vision, and the vision should be very strong, but you should be flexible in how to get there. So that is the bottom line, right? You should always be feet on the ground, close to the team, be in the details, understand the complexity, and best part that Talvinder touched about is the technical funder, right? You need to know how to ship. So based on these two, if you excel on these two, you will be a great product manager. That's one takeaway that I want to summarize all the session that we did so far.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Details matter a lot. And that is what I've seen. A lot of people don't. I mean, most PMs in the early days, they feel that, okay, who is going to sit down and define, or maybe they're just too lazy or they just don't want to define it. I don't know what is the case. They don't think too much about how much of depth is important. The fact of the matter is, the more detail you can add, the better it is, because then you're painting a very clear picture as to what is to be built irrespective, right? Somebody asked a good question. I'm just writing this down. Yeah, I just wrote down something. Let me share my screen once again. Somebody asked that how do you convert a user story or a PRD into user stories or into a Jira ticket, for example. See, broadly speaking, this is what I was talking about since the very start. So there's experience maps, journey maps, service maps, and finally you might have user story maps, right? This is a journey that you'll have. I'm not saying you have to define all of them. You don't have to create all the 4 maps. You can, but you don't have to. You can create only the ones which really is needed to clarify, to give absolute clarity to the users. So what is user story map? A user story map is simply the visual version of a user story. So you have a user story and you just define it. So for example, there's a user story. As a checking account holder, I want to deposit checks with my mobile device so that I don't have to go to the bank. That's a user story. Great. But now what to do in this? How do we convert this into a meaningful task? So what you will do is you will write down the different steps. So for example, log in, begin the deposit, take picture of the check, enter the transaction details, etc. Right? You will write down all these different steps. Correct? Now, for each of this step, you can further document the required features. To log in, I need authentication. To take a picture, I need the user to enable camera access. I need to have a scanning check feature so that I can scan the check and pick up the numbers and autofill the numbers. I want to be able to authorize signature. These are all different features, correct? Now, for example, enabling camera access is a very small task, right? It's a very small task. This can go in a sprint. Technically, it's a very simple task, correct? Scanning check, maybe not, depends on the quality of engineers that you have, correct? And similarly, authorizing signature again is not an easy task. So this might spill over multiple sprints. Scanning, again, depending on the quality of engineers and the complexity of what you're doing, this can run over multiple sprints. While enabling camera access, I know for sure it can be done in one sprint. So then you have enabling camera access is a task in one sprint. Scanning, check, and autofilling numbers. This might be in a single sprint or in multiple sprints. If it goes in multiple sprints, then it's an epic. Okay. Anything that goes in typical, like as a thumb rule, anything that goes in multiple sprints is called an epic. Okay, you would want to track it as an epic. An epic which has multiple smaller tasks that gets done in multiple sprints. And similarly, authorizing signature seems to be a large enough task, and that's why it will go into multiple sprints, which basically means it will be converted into an epic, which will get completed over multiple sprints. Okay. So you can create multiple, you can create these features on sticky notes, and then you can arrange it based on the product release. You can use this sticky notes and create a roadmap also, that I'm going to do this first, then I'm going to do this, then this, then this. Or you can use a Kanban board and you can put the sticky notes and put them in a certain priority order. I hope this answers the question that somebody asked. But who asked? Yep. Cool. So this is where I will pause. There is a lot of questions today, which I'm liking, but yeah, but I'll pause here. Why don't we transfer all of these questions? So Piyush, maybe you can help me. This chat gets saved, so maybe we can transfer this into our Slack channel, and we can discuss each of these questions at length. Okay. There are a lot of things, honestly, in technology. There's a lot of things that we can get into depth into discussion, but we can't cover it. So the idea here today was to essentially give you an overview of what are the different things you need to know about, and then perhaps you can learn on your own. If there are issues, please go ahead and you can ask questions on Slack. Shreyash, we have been announcing the Slack channel since the very beginning. There's a Slack channel. If you have registered, you should have received an email. Please check. Slack sometimes send it to promotional emails or spam emails. So please just check if it has landed there. Okay. So you would have received an invite channel. Please go ahead and use that. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Piyush has just shared the link for Slack as well. Please go ahead and join. This is me signing off. Take care. And in the next session, let me just tell you what we're going to cover. Wait. So we have entered the scope of. So we have defined the why, and right now we're defining what. So in the next session, we're going to define go-to-market and pricing strategy. And there's going to be one surprise speaker, instructor alongside me, somebody incredible. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.